I got to make 9:50. I
Okay,
have to
great.
go to 9:15.
We'll have you out. Okay, Bez Hashem, Daf is Daf Mem Gimel, and we will begin on Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis, and we're talking about Goliath. And I mentioned yesterday that although contemporary science wants to say that he wasn't a perfect individual, he suffered from a vision problem, and that's how David was able to win the battle. But the Gemara just goes through that he was a perfect person. He was a Superman. Okay, so we're up to just finishing up that piece over there. The Gemara says, Ksiv, the Pasuk says, Chetz Chanisai. His spear was Chetz. And the Korinin, but it's read Eitz Chanisai. His spear was made out of wood. So what does Chetz mean? Amar Rabbi Lazar said, Adayin lo higianu lechatzi shivcha shlois rasha. We didn't even express just half the praises of that Rasha. In other words, he was so powerful that the Pasuk only speaks of half his power, half his superhuman strength, half his gigantism. But that's why Chetz means half. And Chanisa is what you praise somebody with. Mekan, from here you learn also that from the Tanakh that was stopped saying all his praises. It says you're not allowed to say over all the praises of Rasha. So you stop at half of it. So the Gemara asks, let's not say praises of this Rasha at all. Just say he was an individual, Goliath, who fought a battle against David. No, David. You have to tell us the praises of David, that his challenger was a superhuman individual. So therefore, that's why we only say part of the praises of Goliath, but he was more than just super duper human. The Gemara just goes on. The Mishnah said, "Bnei Amoin b'im nitzchayni shel shoivach." The people of Amoin had the power of this individual called Shoivach. He was also like a superhuman general for the Amoin Aram army. So, and we come with Hashem. Siv, the pasuk says, like Havdol, they used to say Ramal, Hitler's Yimach Shemoy's general. Anyway, they had the power of Shoivach. Siv Shoivach, we call him Shoivach, Uksiv Shoifach, and sometimes it calls him Shoifech. Rav Shmuel Chadama Shoifech Shmoy. His real name was Shoifech. Why was he called Shoivach? He was made like a shoivach. A shoivach is a chicken coop. Apparently, this is a very tall structure, and that's how the Pasuk nicknames him Shoivach. He was a very tall individual and an intimidating individual. One says Shoivach Shmoy. His name was Shoivach. Why was he called Shoivach? His name was Shoivach. Why is he called Shoivach? Anybody who saw him, all his courage spilled out like water spills out of a jug. You saw him and your heart melted away. You didn't even begin to try to challenge such an individual. Then the pasuk describes another pasuk describes the army of Nebuchadnezzar, his main army. Ashpasai kekeva pesuach kulam gebayrim. Ashpasai, Rav Shmuel v'Amri le Rav Ami Rabasi. It's a machlekes Rav Shmuel, or some say it's Rav Ami Rabasi. What does it mean? Ashpasai, their pile was like an open grave. Chad Oma, one said, when these people, I guess these were the Navy SEALs in Nebuchadnezzar's army who destroyed the first base of Migdash, when they would throw a spear, they would make heaps and heaps of dead people because they were so powerful that one spear like pierced through a couple of individuals. Maybe they were skilled in battle, but they weren't strong people. They were all powerful people. Hi, we're up to Membez and Membez, like 5 lines from the bottom. And we're talking about the powerful people who are the elite of Nebuchadnezzar's army. The Chad one says that when the pasuk describes Ashpasoi kekeva pesuach, it means when they would go to the bathroom and have a bowel movement, they would make heaps and heaps of excrement. In other words, that they ate so much, like a football player. Hey, maybe you were sick, they had a colon problem. Talmud Loima Kulam Gibarim. These were all powerful people. And these was the army facing the Jewish people. That's what Yirmiyahu describes. Amar Rab Mari. Rab Mari said, Shmamina, from we hear from this pasuk, Haiman denaf zivli. If a person excretes a lot of excrement, too much, and then normal, you got to go to a doctor. There's something wrong with your intestines. Why should I know that? Rashi says you should start looking for some medicine before it gets worse. So you have to test yourself. Then once we had a machlekes between Rab Ami and Rabasi, the Gemara brings down another machlekes they had. The pasuk says, "Da'aga b'leid ish." If a person has worry in his heart, yashchena, he should do something. What should a person do when he has a worry in his heart? Rab Ami Rabasi, it's a machlekes. Chad ama yashchenu midaitai. One says, at least from the outset, you should try to get your focus somewhere else. Try to move it away from your mind, and that requires strength. The others say, you should try to speak it out with somebody else. And that's more of a help. Don't try to fight the battle with the brain. Try to speak it out with a social worker. So that's how they also had a machlekes. How do you touch up the Mishlei, the proverb pasuk, daga b'levis yashchena. Now, back into the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, "Va'atim atim came." The Kohen said to the Jewish people, "You're better than them because you have God hoilich imochem. God is going with you." So the Gemara asks, "V'kol kach lama." What does it mean? God is walking with me, because it really means that. Because when the Jews went to battle, they took the Orin with them. The Orin went with them. We go to the top of Mem Gimel Aleph, and here it is. All of God's names are in the Orin. So therefore, when the Jews went out to the war, they went with the Orin. It's not clear if it's the same Orin. Maybe they had a double Orin, another Orin that was used just for war. The pasuk says, the pasuk describes when the Jews went to war against Midian to take revenge because the Midianim seduced them with the story of Pinchas and Zimri and with the advice of Bilam. So the Jews went to war against Midian, which is local, which is probably where Saudi Arabia is. There was 1,000. There was 12,000 men. So every Shevet sent 1,000 people for the army. Oisam them. That's Pinchas, and Pinchas was also went for this war. Oisam Elu Sanhedrin. Oisa means that the 70 members of Sanhedrin went into the war. So there was 12,070. Pinchas also went to the war because he is a Kohen. And Zeh, what is the Kohen doing in the war? Mishuach Mechamal. As we see that there's a special Kohen who is anointed for war, and he's the one that gives the pep talk. Ukli HaKodesh. And the pasuk also says that they took with them the holy vessels. So what went with them with the war? That's exactly what we're talking about. The Orin, the Luchas Shabai. The Orin and the Luchas, which is both kalim of vessels, they went along with the war. They brought shofars also to the war. Now, who led the army into this war against Midian? So the Gemara just sidetracks. Tana, we learned in the Brisa. It wasn't for naught that Pinchas was the one that led the Jews in the Machama. Because the Midyanim, he had a grind to take revenge against the Midyanim. He wanted to take revenge on behalf of his maternal grandfather. Because Pinchas is the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, but his mother came from Yosef. And Yosef, Shenema, the pasuk says, when Yosef was sold to Mitzrayim, Yosef probably was begging them, "Don't sell me, bring me back to my father." But the pasuk says, "V'hamiddanim machroi sel Mitzrayim." And according to the Gemara, the Middanim are the Midyanim. They sold Yosef to Mitzrayim, and they didn't heed his calling and begging. So Pinchas was the appropriate one to take revenge against the Midyanim. So the Gemara says, remember, do you want to say the Pinchas? Pinchas came from his lineage comes from Yosef. But the pasuk says the Elazar ben Aaron, the father of Pinchas, which is Elazar, he took for himself from the daughters of Putiel, the one who's called Putiel, and that was his wife. Who was Putiel? My love, doesn't it mean the asu mi Yisroi shepita magalim la by It means that the Putiel was Yisroi. Another name for Yisroi was Potiel. Why was he called Potiel? Because Yisroi, prior to becoming a Jew, was a person that was cruelly fattening animals for slaughter for idols. He was a cruel person. And therefore, that was his wife. After Yisroi became a ger, Lazar took one of his daughters. I guess he became the brother-in-law of Moshe, took one of his daughters for a wife. So how could you say Pinchas came from Yosef? He came from Yisroi. Answers the Gemara, Loi. Yosef. But B'nois B'tiel doesn't mean he came from Yisroi. No, Shepitbit be Yitzroi. He came from Yosef, and Putiel means not Yisroi, but from the family of Yosef, Shepitbit be Yisroi. Yosef did pitpate with his Yetzirah. Let's see what Rashi says. That Rashi says that Yosef, when he was seduced by the Ashes Potiphar, he said, "Shezilzil v'kovashay." He degraded the Yetzirah. He didn't give much attention and credence to his thoughts of being mizana with her. And that's how he overcame the Yetzirah. That's why it was the tactic that Yosef used to overcome the Yetzirah was called pitpate, and that's why it's Putiel. So now the Gemara holds that that Pinchas comes from the family of Yosef. So the Gemara asks, not true. The Shvatim would insult Pinchas because they would call him, you're the son of Yisroi. You know, this Pinchas who overpowered and came and stabbed Zimri because he was doing znus, he was a president of one of the Shvatim of Yisrael. People were saying, who is this guy? His grandfather was Yisroi, and so who was fattening cows to Avodah Zarah. So we see they picked on one thing that they degrade Pinchas. So how could you say he comes from Yosef? So the Gemara says, true, he comes from both. If his maternal grandfather was from Yosef, then his maternal grandmother is from Yisroi. If his maternal grandmother is from Yosef, then his maternal grandfather is from Yisroi. So basically, he wasn't the exact daughter, but the mother of Pinchas was a offspring of both from Yosef and somebody from the Yisroi family. I'll prove with you the ksiv, because the pasuk calls the wife of Elazar, the father of Pinchas, that he took mibnois Putiel, from the two people who are called Putiel. You see, it says a yud over there. Trei mashma. There were two people called Putiel, one Yisroi and one Yosef. Shema minot. So we see from here that Pinchas comes from both lineages, Yosef and Yisroi. Now we start the next Mishnah. I'll just bring up the psukim over here. The psukim on the screens describe what the Kohen would give the pep talk when they went to war. He says, the pasuk says, this is what we just learned, that the Kohen Mashiach Muhammad would make this speech. Shema Yisrael, Jewish people, don't be don't break apart, don't be afraid of them. God is going with you. What did that mean? We just learned it means they aren't. Then the pasuk says, "V'dibru hashoitrim." Then there was a speech from the officers, not the kohen, and he would say, he would give the rules of the rules of the people who could stay in the army, and he would make an announcement. If there's a person that built a house and didn't dedicate it or didn't live there yet, he has to go back home. He can't be in this army. And then he says, Mio ish, ashunot kerem, if he planted a vineyard. Now, you know, the first 3 years of a tree is early. You can't benefit from it. And the 4th year, you could benefit, but you have to give off what's called kerem ravai. Take off a piece and bring it to the base, take off everything and bring it to the base of Migdash, or you transfer the Kedusha onto money. Anyway, it's like Ma'aser Sheni. If you didn't get a chance to do that, you have to go home. If a person if he got engaged and didn't get married yet, he gets kicked out of the army. Okay, and then the pasuk says, and they continued they continued to speak and said, if you're scared to go into war, get out of this army and don't make everybody don't be a bad influence on the hearts of your brothers. And then they went to the war. So now the pasuk just describes again what the psukim mean. If you built a house and you didn't live in there, you get a chance to be exempt from the war. if you built, it doesn't mean if you built a house. You got a house, you got the C of O, but you never lived in there. Or even if you built a base of heaven, a house that stores straw, base of baka, or barn, base of eitzim, or house that you're going to store wood, base of oiters, or the house that you're going to store produce, oil, or wheat. So it doesn't matter. Since potentially you could live there, it's a nice structure. So then, if you didn't get a chance to use it, you're exempt from the war. Whether you built it, if you bought it, or you inherited, you didn't exactly build it. This is something brand new to you. If it was gifted to you for a gift, you get the exemption from going to war. If you planted a vineyard and you didn't get a chance to benefit from the fruits. Remember, the first fruits are arla for the first 3 years. So you have this vineyard and you didn't use it yet. You didn't have a grape from it. It doesn't matter if you planted a vine. Even if you planted 5 different apple trees. Even if you planted an apple trees, it has to be 5. You have to have 5 trees. Just like a vine, you don't plant 1 vine, you plant 5 vines. So if you want this exemption, it doesn't have to be grapes. If you planted apples, peaches, and oranges, but you have to have 5 trees, and if you didn't benefit from 5 trees, then you get this exemption from going to war. It doesn't matter if you planted it, whether you bended the branch. Let's say you have an old tree, and you bended a branch into the ground to grow a new tree, so that's like a new tree. So we're going to learn more about that, grafting the tree. Even if you didn't plant the tree, if you bought a tree or you inherited a brand new tree or it was gifted to you, so it's a brand new tree and you didn't benefit from it, then you get the exemption from going to war. If you just got engaged to a woman, so then you get the exemption of going to war. But we're going to see it's not a complete exemption. We'll see in a moment. If you got engaged to a basula, even if you got engaged to a person who was married before, even if it's your Yavama that's falling to a Yibam, you heard your brother died in war, so now your brother's wife is falling to you as a Yibam, so therefore it's a brand new wife, and you didn't go to chuppah yet with that person. You go home, and you go out from the army and you go home, but you don't really go home. Call Eli, all these people. All these shaymin, they call Elu they shaymin divrei kain. They listen to the words of the kain, of the regulations of war. So they hear everything that is being said, and then what do? Then they heard the regulation. They help out in the back ends. They just leave the war, but they help out providing food, packages, and fixing roads. The following people are not, they get no exemptions from the war. If you built, let's say, if you built a house, but not a house for a guard, like a small booth, or chsadro, you built like a deck in your backyard, or a fire escape. So that's not really a living space. If you only planted 4 fruit trees, or even if you planted 5 trees, but they are trees that don't produce fruit, like a cedar tree. If you're taking back your original wife that you divorced, or if it was an illegal marriage, let's say the Kohen Gadol is part of the army. He could be part of the army. It's interesting. And he's married to Almana, so that's an illegal marriage. Or if it's a divorcee for a regular Kohen, that's also an illegal marriage. Or a regular Jew marries a mamzeres. Or the opposite case, Bas Yisrael to a mamzer and nasin. So also it's an illegal marriage by the mamzer. So even though if the mamzer is part of the army, the Mishnah says, loy haya chayzer. They wouldn't go back because that's not a true exemption. The exemption is if you have a legal marriage. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you built a brand new house, like they do, even if you're like Lawrence, but you didn't remove the foundation because you want to save on taxes, right? So you just refurbished your house. You didn't go back. That wasn't an exemption from going to war. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it has to be a super brand new house that you knock down everything and it's from the foundation up, you built it. Rabbi Lezer says, if you built a house of bricks in this place called Sharain, which is not going to last too long because it's a swampy area, so it's going to collapse, let's say in 2-3 years. So that's not called building a house. So they wouldn't go back. They would stay in the army. The following don't even enter the army to begin with. In other words, before they mobilize, they don't even have to answer the draft notice. Why? Because for the following people, he built the house and he's actually living there, but this is his first year living there. Not the Karen B'chilulai. He has a vineyard, a vine, and he's actually eating. This is the first time he's eating the grapes. He actually married his girl. He married his Yavama. Then the pasuk says what's called Shana Rishayna. People often think Shana Rishayna only applies in the Chumash, only if you marry a lady, that you're supposed to be exempt from going to work that first year. Pasuk says, Shnema Noki Shana Echas. You have to be Noki, you have to be clean, that you have no responsibilities for 1 year. For your own house. If you buy a house, you have to be able to enjoy it for a year. You're exempt from even joining the army. Zakarma. If you have a vine and you're just first time you're benefiting from it, you don't go to war. That's his wife. So all these cases, Shana Rishayna, a guy in Koil, the first year he's married, he would not even answer the draft notice. Not only that, they wouldn't even fix the roads or provide food packages because they're supposed to be exempt just to make your wife happy. The rabbis taught. Maybe they made up their own speeches, the officers. The pasuk says that Shaitrim would continue to make up a new speech. So what does the pasuk begin? V'dibru Shaitrim. As I showed you before, pasuk says 1, V'dibru Shaitrim, and number 2 on the page, V'yasvu Shaitrim. So what's V'dibru? What's V'yasvu? Okay, said Kohen Medaber. The first time the Kohen Meshuach will say his speech. V'Shaitim Mashmiya. Then the Shaita will give his speech. Will say over the speech of the Kohen and then say his own speech. Then the Brisa says, Tonachada, we learned in one Brisa, Kohen Medaber V'Shaitim Mashmiya. The Kohen would speak and the officer will give over the lesson. Tanya Idach, when another Brisa says, Kohen Medaber V'Kohen Mashmiya. That the Kohen would speak and another Kohen would give it over and say it again. The Tanya Idach and another Brisa says Shoiter Medaba, a Shoiter would speak, and Shoiter Mashmi, and another officer would be the loudspeaker. How do you resolve all these 3 different Brises? Amar Abaya HaKetzad. I'll tell you how. V'nigash v'ad v'dibru koyin medaba v'koyin mashmiya. The first psukim that says V'hoya kakar v'chan v'nigash ha'koyin told the dibru, there was one koyin, the koyin Mashiach B'chama said the speech, and the koyin, another kohen would actually be the loudspeaker that made it said it over again. Now that was the first bright. That was the second bright. Then there was a pasuk that said the Dibru Arviyasu, where describes the regulations of war. Till that pasuk, kohen medaba, the kohen would speak it. Actually, the kohen would speak it. V'shoitim ashmiya, and the officers would repeat what the kohen said. So it wasn't that the officers made this up. The Kohen actually said it, and the Shoiter will be the loudspeaker to make sure everybody heard it. Then from Yasu Ve'elech, which means if you're scared, the Pasuk says that the Shoiter would say, if you're very scared, you better get out of this army. That was Shoiter. That was the third Brisa. Shoiter Medaba was just an officer saying that for Shoiter Mashmiya, and another officer would make sure that everybody heard it. Ashabana, that you built a new house. Ainli el Ashabana. What if you built a house? What happens? Lokach, you bought a new house, Yarash, you inherited a house. Tana was gifted to you a house. Manayin, how do you know that you get that exemption? If you're a person and it's a brand new house to you, we look at you. Not it's a new house; it's the new house to the person. So even if he inherited or bought it, he would actually be exempt. That's only by a house. If he built structures, but not necessarily that he's going to live there, maybe he built a barn. How do you know you get that exemption? It doesn't say Ashabayis Bona, a house he built. He's Ashabona, he built. No matter what he built, if it's If it's whatever, no matter what he builds, he gets the exemption. Maybe if he built a tree house or he built a deck or a fire escape, how do you know? Maybe you get exemption for that. Has to be something, a structure that potentially you could move in there. It doesn't mean that you're actually living there. You could have built it as a storage place, but if it's a strong structure, then you get the exemption. But if you built a fire escape or an outdoor deck, so then you wouldn't get the exemption. The only exemption is if you built a house, not anything else. Then the pasuk says, could have said loy chanach. You didn't dedicate it. But it doesn't. It says you didn't dedicate this house. It excludes that there is one case that if you actually stole a house. Now, how do you stole a house? Maybe you walked into somebody's house and kicked them out. So it's a brand new house to you. You wouldn't get that exemption. If you stole a house, you don't get the exemption. I don't know why he's going to war, but so the Gemara says, what do you need that? Rabbi Yosef Glili wouldn't even need this pasuk to tell me that if you steal a house, you don't get the exemption. Rabbi Yosef Glili, if it went according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, Ha'amar, who said, Barach Leva, that if you're afraid, we go to Amid Beis, and Gimel Amid Beis, if you're afraid of the Averis that you did, you get kicked out of the army. And if a guy stole a house, he gets kicked out of the army. So why did we just say that if you stole a house, you don't get the exemption? You have to be part of the army. Wait a second. If you stole a house, you get kicked out because you're a person that has Avera. And we don't want a person with Averis to be in our army. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef Glili. You could say our Gemara is going according to Rabbi Yosef Glili. Going to Avet Tshuva, if a man did Tshuva, and he did Tshuva, and therefore he's potentially a person who could be part of the army because he did Tshuva. V'yahav domain, he paid back the money that he stole. He paid the guy for the house. So the Gemara says, then why isn't he exempt? So he should be like somebody who just bought a new house. He should be exempt. He should be able to return and not be part of the army. Answers the Gemara, but since since in the beginning, how did he get into the house? He actually had to steal it. Even subsequently, he paid for it, but he had to steal it first. So therefore, then he does not get the exemption of a new house, and therefore he has to remain in the army. If you planted a vineyard, turn around, the rabbis taught, if you planted a new vine, then you get this exemption. If you bought it or inherited it was gifted to you, how do you know you get the exemption? It says, if it's your brand new vine that you just bought it, then you get the exemption. I only know if you bought a vine. How do you know? Maybe the Torah meant only a vine and nothing else. The pasuk says, that if you planted it, that means that even if you planted not just a vine, you planted a tree, any tree, a fruit tree, a peach tree, an orange tree, you get the exemption. Maybe the Torah is telling you that only if you plant, that included in that exemption, if you planted 4 fruit trees, not like the way you plant vines, which you plant 5 at a time, or if you planted any tree, even cedar trees, 5 cedar trees. It has to be similar to a vine. So it could be a fruit tree, but similar to a vine in the fact that you planted 5. Rab Lezer ben Yaakov, again, we've seen this Rab Lezer ben Yaakov before, that he says, no, the Torah, the only exemption is if you planted a vine. It has to be only a vine. Then we said, loy chilul v'loy chiloi. Prat, there's a brisa that says, and this will take us to the end of the page. Prat mavrech l'market. If you graft, let's say you took a tree and you grafted the tree into another tree, the new branch will grow new fruit, right? That's how you graft. You take a branch from one, stick it into the hole into another tree, and then new fruit will come out from the graft, from the branch that you grafted. So if you did that, then you don't get the exemption. So the Gemara says that if you graft a tree and there's brand new fruit coming from that branch, you do get the exemption. How do you square off the brisa that says you don't get the exemption? It's not difficult. The brisa that says that you don't get the exemption, if you took a tree and you grafted it into, or you did an avera by grafting it into, let's say, another tree that it's not the same min, not the same species. So that's a veira of kalayim. So you don't get the exemption. Kan bar kovas heter. Our Mishnah says that you do get the exemption if you grafted b'derech heter, the same species to the same species. Let's say the same orange tree to another orange tree. Then you get, since it's a brand new fruit coming out of that branch, you would get the exemption. So Gemara says, "Hi, kovas heter ekadomi." How did you get this branch into the new? What's the case, Avraham Mishnah, that you get the exemption? Ilema, would you say yalda be yalda? It's a new tree into a new tree. So the grafting tree, the ones that's receiving the branch, is a new tree. Even of course you don't you get the exemption because the tree that's being grafted into is a new tree. So with any new tree you get the exemption. Take Biklei the boy Mahadar Bishum Yalda Rishonya. He gets the exemption because he already owns a new tree, so he doesn't need the graft coming into that tree. El Yalda Biskena. It's an old tree. And what you're grafting is a new tree into an old tree. So the Gemara says that even you make things worse because the new tree becomes like the old tree, and it's as if you have an old tree. A new tree that you grafted into an old tree, the new tree is like nullified; it becomes non-existent because now everything becomes one old tree. There's no din arla on it. So again, you wouldn't get the exemption. So the Gemara gives a taretz. Another 1 minute. You're grafting a new tree to a new tree. The tree that you're grafting into was meant for a beans. You didn't plant it for a fruit tree, so it's not really a new tree. We consider it not a fruit tree. So I would think when you graft another new tree into it, so then that yalda would become like the tree that was planted for beams or wood, and therefore it would not be considered to be a new tree. It would lose its status of new. We learned to the Mishnah, if you plant a tree to make floorboards or to make wood or for beams, patim and arla, because even though there's fruit coming out of it, you didn't plant it as a fruit tree. You wanted to use the wood from the tree. So the Gemara asks a question. So why is it that a yalda beskena is nullified, and you said a yalda b'yalda loy batla? When a yalda gets into a skena, everything becomes a zaken. When a yalda gets into this yalda, even though the yalda is not a viable tree, we don't say it gets nullified. So the Gemara answers, Hasam imim lecha lo labas mehedi. You can't turn an old tree into make it be mechayiv and arla. Over here, imim lecha lo, the tree, let's say the tree that was planted for wood, if you think about and say, you know what, I don't want to use it for wood, it becomes bas mehadi, it becomes mechayiv arla. Midi dehava olamir lane. If a tree grows by itself, if a tree grows by itself, it's chayev and arla. So Gemara asks a question. Why don't we say it's talking about a kerem of two partners, that each one that the tree that you grafted into is belongs to somebody else. So therefore, you can't ask the question. He anyway had to go back because of the tree that he grafted into. He doesn't own that tree. And the fact that we didn't do that, answer that. If the tree belonged to somebody else, then the person that grafted into that tree, it's not considered a new tree. The answer is that when a woman dies, all brothers are exempt from going to war because that woman could potentially marry any of the brothers. But over here, it's not your kerem. If you graft a tree into another tree, so now the whole group together is considered a shared tree, and therefore it's not your tree, and therefore you don't get the exemption. Rab Nachman be Yitzchak, two more terutzim. Rab Nachman Yitzchak till the red. Rab Nachman Yitzchak b'mavrach ilim b'yeret. You grafted a tree into a vegetable. And that's what we're talking about here. You grafted a tree in vegetable, and that's permitted to do so. So it's not kalayim. But Tanahu the Tanya mavrach ilim b'yeret. Shimon Matam Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamda Ishkvar Alkoi also was mater to graft a tree into a vegetable. Chachamim oisrim. And Chachamim say it's not permitted to do that. So we have another teretz. Our Mishnah is talking about you graft a tree, brand new tree, into a vegetable. So what grows out is considered to be a brand new tree. even though let's say you have a 10-year-old tree, you graft it into a vegetable, if now new things are coming out from that branch, that you get the exemption. And then we said, we could say a simple case that the reason why the Brisa says that you don't get the exemption for grafting, Haman Rab Lezer B'Yankiv. Rab Lezer B'Yankiv is the one that says grafting a branch doesn't give you the exemption, and that's what that Brisa says, that you don't get the exemption. Our Mishnah holds, not like Rab Lezer B'Yankiv, that the grafting, if you graft an old tree and you make a new branch and graft it into another tree and new fruits coming out, so then you get the exemption, and that's how we square off the Brisa versus the Mishnah. Okay, a little rushed at the end there, but nevertheless, a good Shabbos, everybody.